Hey, girl.
Hey, girl, hey.
We are back.
Yeah.
Wow, it has been a minute. Look at me.
This is episode 19. I can't believe we made it to 19 episodes. It's taken a while, but
She's a teenager.
she's a
Crazy.
teenager. We've made
Almost
it.
20.
Almost 20, just like me.
Wow. Oh, they grow up so fast.
Anyways, welcome back to the podcast where we ask the questions that nobody really asks. My name is Maya Falcon.
And I'm Ariana Fernandez. And today we're going to do a little catch up with Maya. Because if you haven't listened to it already, episode 18 was Maya's episode where she shared her story. And if you haven't listened to it, go listen to it. What are you doing? Stop this one. We'll be right here when you come back.
Yeah.
Stop this one, go listen to her episode. It's a great episode. And I'm just, again, so proud of you for sharing your story. But today we're just gonna catch up and kind of, touch space with her episode and kind of the topics that she talked about. So without further ado, roll the intro music. That beat go hard.
That beat do go hard.
I wonder who made it.
Yeah. Little Ariana on the beat.
Let's just dive right into it. So Maya, now that your episode is out there, now that you've kind of shared your story, how are you feeling?
I felt a lot the past week with my episode being out, but I think the biggest emotion that I'm feeling is loved, because a lot of you guys have reached out and let me know how the episode has resonated with you, or how you appreciated me coming forward about my story and sharing my experiences, which is really just a reminder as to why I shared my story in the first place. And it feels really good.
I love that for you. I also think, even obviously me firsthand, like I saw you, kind of go through that, and now seeing you share it is amazing. And I know so many people can, even if they don't resonate with the episode, they can appreciate that you felt the strength and the courage and the bravery to actually come forward and share it. Just so, it must feel like a weight off your shoulders. But I guess what I wanted to ask was, the day that it was released at 12 p.m., how were you feeling in that moment?
I was nervous, but I knew at the end of the day it's what I wanted to do, and I wanted to share my story, and I knew it was the right thing to do too, because I think just in general, if I'm advocating for mental health and stuff on this podcast, I can't be doing that if I don't do that for myself. So I knew it was the right thing to do, and I knew it was a good time for me to come forward about my story.
Again, me firsthand, like I saw you go through it, and this time last year, I don't think you would have been ready to talk about something like this, which is completely valid. Everyone goes through their own things and everyone has their own journey. And I think with you, you finally came to a point where you were comfortable talking about it. And that is not an easy thing to do at all. And I hope people who did listen to Maya's episode, who have maybe gone through something similar in regards to sports, in regards to life, period, those things are not easy. I just hope that was a sign for you that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It does get better at some point.
I think you're 100% right when you say that a year ago I wouldn't have been ready to share my story, because I just wasn't at much peace as I am now with it. And I think it's just a testament to what time and growth really does for a person, especially for me and for anyone who's going through anything, whether it be depression like me, anxiety like me, anything. I think you just hang in there, because things do get better. And I promise you that, like Ariana said, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I guess all that being said, I put out a Q&A on Instagram, and you guys asked, and we're going to answer, or I'm going to answer, and we're going to have a little discussion about it.
Yes, ma'am. So the next question that we have here is, how did you know it was time to quit?
I think in my experience, I didn't know it was time to quit. I was unfortunately pulled from the sport because I was in such a terrible place that coaches and medical professionals had to pull me from the sport. And I think you don't want it to get to that point. I think I don't even like using the word quit, because I feel like it's such an aggressive term, or like has a negative connotation to it. I prefer the term retire, to be honest. But I think once you start to feel that love fade for your sport or whatever it may be, I think it's time to take a step back, whether it be taking a couple practices off, just taking some time for yourself to explore other things. And if you feel that it's time to retire, you'll know it's time to retire. And if you do retire and you all of a sudden feel like maybe, it wasn't my time, you can always go back to it. And that's what I did. I went back to it. It didn't work out for me, but I did. I gave it a chance and I went back to it. And, I was able to assess my situation even further. So I think in general, to answer that question, once you start to feel the love fade, I think it's time to take a step back and assess the whole situation at your own discretion.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I also think, like Maya said, when you go through that, maybe I should assess my situation. When Maya says, like, like, oh, maybe I should take a break, I think it's completely okay to take a break from what you're doing, whether that's a week, 2 days, 3 days, a month, 2 months. I don't give a shit. Take that break.
Yeah.
And like Maya said, if you want to go back, go back. Because guess
Yeah.
what? It's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
There's no time limit. Again, this is your own journey. This is your own process. So don't let anyone dictate it except for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously there are people to help guide you, like your parents, like coaches, medical professionals, so on and so forth. But this is your journey. And if you feel the need to retire or go back, do it.
Mm-hmm.
100% do it, because
Yeah.
you don't want to be left with that feeling of, oh, what if, I think one thing in particular with Maya's story, she did everything. It's not like she didn't do anything. She did everything she could, and if anything more. So, I think it's better to have that feeling of, I did everything I could, and there's nothing more that I could have done.
Yeah, and I think when I was pulled from the sport, I think it was a hard thing for me to accept because I knew I was going to be, quote unquote, losing training time, this and that. But in reality, it was what I needed, both physically and mentally. And I think, like Ariana said, swimming wasn't going anywhere, but my mental health was going places for the worse. So I think it was important for me to take that break, and the people around me made the right call.
What's the biggest misconception about an athlete's mental health?
It's a big question because there's a lot that can be said. And I think this podcast is just a testament of that. We talk about it a lot. But I think one really big misconception surrounding athlete mental health is that just athletes are completely invincible. No matter what level you're at, I feel like a lot of people think that athletes are invincible and that they don't go through mental struggles, when in reality, there's a lot of scientific proof and like data that shows that athletes are actually a lot more susceptible to mental health issues and mental illnesses because of just the stress and everything that they go through. And I think we all go through it, and not everyone has mental illness, but everyone has mental health. And I think that's something really important that needs to be highlighted. And you don't want it to get to a point of mental illness. You want to take care of your mental health to the point where you don't have to go through the mental illness. So I think it's just important to highlight that, even though athletes are doing the sport that they love, and it seems like everything's okay because they're doing what they love, they still go through some tough times mentally.
Yeah, I completely agree. I couldn't have said that better myself. I think, just like what you said, I think it was Brittany McLean who actually said that, not everyone has mental illness, but everyone has mental health. And I think that is the biggest misconception, that, just because you don't have a mental illness, you shouldn't take care of your mental health. And that is not true at all. You should 100% be taking care of your mental health in every way, shape, and form. For example, if we're going to compare it to physical health, because that is one of the biggest comparisons, we're saying that you should prioritize, everyone is saying it now, you should prioritize your mental health as much as you should your physical health. For example, if you have a minor injury, or let's say a minor sprain of some sort in your body, what are you going to do? Ignore it? No, you're going to do things, to help you get better. You take Advil, you see a physiotherapist, whatever you do. I think it's just unfortunate that most athletes are built this way because of, just the stigma around mental health in itself. And also, I'm not saying every program is like this, but, athletic programs are kind of built up in this way that athletes will neglect their mental health because, no one's asking you about it. We need to create an environment where it is safe to talk about these things, and where it's okay to talk about these things. Because if you are struggling in any way, shape, or form, you need to you need to talk to someone about it. It may not be everyone, but it has to be someone because
No one can do it alone.
exactly, you can't struggle on your own with these things. It's not easy. And again, with Maya's episode, she talked about reaching out to people because she knew she couldn't do it alone, and that is totally fine.
Yeah. And I think another misconception, whether this is surrounding athletes' mental health or anything like that, but a misconception that I think happens a lot in sport is that it's tough to hide that stuff. And it's a sign of strength to put that stuff aside and not address it. When in reality, it's actually the opposite. It's a sign of strength to come forward and say, hey, I'm struggling, I'm not doing too well, I need some help. And that's okay. And for me, in my episode, I explained how it got to a point where I couldn't even control it anymore. It just came out of me. And you don't really want to get to that point. You want to be able to take care of it before it gets really bad like that. But I think another misconception is just that toxic toughness in the world of sport that we live in and the stigma
Mhm.
around it all.
I mentioned it before, but I just feel like all athletes should feel comfortable going forward to their coaches and saying, "Hey, I'm struggling. I need your help." Or just to be like, "Hey, I'm struggling. I don't need your help specifically, but I just need you to listen and I need you to hear me." And I just hate that some people just still don't get that, or some coaches or professionals just do not understand that. Sometimes you just need someone to listen,
Yep.
and you just need your coach to hear you and say, "It's okay. I am here for you." That's it. That is the best thing you can do, in my opinion. Just say, "I hear you. I'm here for you, and I see you."
Yeah. And
That's one of the best things you can do. And I just hate that some coaches just still they can say those things, but they don't act on it.
yeah.
They can say, "Oh, yeah, whatever you need, I'm here for you."
Mm-hmm.
And then just completely neglect it.
Yeah.
The next question we have here is, what role did your parents play in your healing journey? And I know, before you answer, obviously you talked about it, they played obviously a significant role in your healing process and your healing journey. What was it like having the support from your parents in this journey?
In this journey, I think if I'm being honest, I did a lot of the journey by myself in the beginning, and that's what made it so tough. And that's what I think really led me down a really dark path. But eventually, when I did get my parents involved and my coaches involved, they played a tremendous role in the whole healing journey. I couldn't have done it without them. And I think that's just so important for an athlete or just someone in general who's going through their own shit, to be blunt. Like, whoever, if you're going through your own shit, like, it's so important to have people around you that can support you and be there for you. Because, like I said before, no one can do it alone. And to just have someone there to support you and listen, not even respond, most of the time, just listen to you and try and understand what you're going through is something that can't be bought and is irreplaceable.
I kind of want to add more to that question. What did you appreciate the most from your parents in this process? Because I know everyone is different, but you specifically, what did your parents do that helped you get to this point?
One of the biggest things that they did for me was they tried to understand, but they never fully said, like, oh, Maya, I understand what you're going through. Because in reality, that can be a little bit discouraging because you're down so bad that truly no one is going to know how you're feeling or know what you're experiencing and can really understand. So I think the biggest thing they did was just literally be there for me and just check in on me every now and then. And they took me to my appointments, like my therapy appointments, my physio appointments, and everything like that. And that's all that I could have asked for them.
I feel like that's one of the best things they could have done, and I feel like obviously for any parent out there that listens to this podcast, I think the biggest thing that you can do and ever should do is be the best listener you can be, because like Maya said, you will never fully understand, and you just have to come to terms with that. No one will ever fully understand what you're going through unless you are the person themselves. And I think the best thing that you can do is just be there to support them in any way that they need. Just for them to be there with you in any way that you needed is, I feel like, one of the best things as an athlete, as a person, as anyone. It's just nice to know that you are loved and you are supported in any way, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it wasn't just my parents, it was my coaches too. Like, they played a tremendous role in really helping me get back on my feet, really, to be honest. And I think that's really important. I think coaches need to be involved as possible, and for parents as well in an athlete's healing journey for sure.
The next question we have here is, how did you cope with insecurities and cope in general during this whole process?
I think for me, the biggest thing that I didn't do was cope. I think I just tried to sweep it under the rug and go along and pretending like nothing was wrong. And I think that's where I went wrong in my whole process of everything. And that's what led me down a really dark path. So, to answer that question, I don't think I did cope. And eventually, it got to a point where I could no longer keep my emotions intact, and then they just came out. And honestly, that was probably the best thing that had happened for me, just so that we could, I could start coping and learning how to cope with these things and find ways to get better.
I I I know you said that wasn't really coping, but I also think in a way it is coping. It's not a healthy coping mechanism, however, it is coping. It's
Yeah.
some way of coping. I think, sometimes that is, I'm not saying it's, again, I'm not saying it's the best way to cope, but I think given the circumstances, sometimes when you don't know what tools you have available to you or what to do in those kind of situations, that's all you really can do. And kind of like what I said before, this is a whole process and it was not linear for you. And I know you can definitely attest to that. But I also think it's part of that process, unfortunately. That kind of way that you cope and just sweeping it under the rug, it's part of that process. The best way to cope in that situation, in that given moment, sometimes you have to sweep it under the rug, but eventually you address it. At some point,
Yes.
you have to address it. And again, it's just part of the process, and that's what makes it the healing journey.
And I think everyone's journey is different, right? So you're ready to come forward when you say you're ready to come forward. And that's no one's discretion except for yours, and it's okay if you need time. But I think eventually it's really, really important that we come forward with these things, with mental health issues and problems and things that we're dealing with, to make sure that we're coping in healthy ways, because I definitely didn't cope in a healthy manner whatsoever.
Yeah, and I think that's okay too, sometimes at least you acknowledge that. And I
Yeah.
think now it's more important than ever that you know that, because in the future, if something comes your way, which I'm sure there will be other things that come your way, you know how to address it and you know how to
Yeah.
cope with it and you know what not to do,
Yeah,
which I also think
exactly.
is very important, just learning from your journey and your process. Because again, everyone is different and yours is very unique to you too.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so the next question, a lighter question, a good question. Um, it is, what brings you joy now? And I know swimming brought you joy at some point, and you kind of talked about your, process with swimming and coming to terms with it, and now loving swimming, but in a different way. So I guess now, what, going to the question, what brings you joy now?
I think I've definitely refound a love for swimming and just being in the water. I think when I was competitively swimming and was at a point where I hated it, I didn't like, we have a pool in our backyard. I didn't even like going in the pool for fun. If it was just to do, hang out with friends or family, just swim, I did not like that. But I've refound that love. Unfortunately, it's winter right now, so we can't use the pool. It's covered in like 12 feet of snow. But that's definitely something that brings me joy. But truthfully and honestly, something that I can finally say brings me joy. I finally have that thing to tell people I like to do, and that's podcasting. It's something that I love to do. And whether it's by myself with Aryanna is even better. It's just something that I love to do. And I guess I don't think that I talk very much, but it's just a way for me to let things out. And, that was a terrible answer, but podcasting.
No, okay, no, that is not a terrible answer, because I think, we talked about it before, how sports and swimming specifically was an outlet or is an outlet for the both of us. This isn't your new outlet. And this is what I'm saying, this wasn't, Maya did not pick up a mic right when she quit swimming. That is definitely not what happened. I'm telling you, part of the process. Like, to get to this point a year ago today, or even a year ago when we started this podcast, it took some time to get there, but she did. And that's just the perfect example. There are things that bring her joy now. And I will be the first to tell you, I did not think Maya wanted to do a podcast because I didn't think, personally, I'm not like no shade to you. I
No,
just did not think you'd ever be ready to talk about it. But now that you are, it's a beautiful thing. It really is, talking about your process. It's so unique to literally anyone that I have ever known. And it's so encouraging. And it's just like, it's amazing to hear things like this and to have this platform. Even if we don't have a big following, it's just nice to talk about these things and normalize these things, or maybe not normalize the feelings that come with sport.
it's just like you said, it's an outlet for me. And I just remember being so depressed and so anxious all the time that like I'm finally in a place where I don't really feel that way anymore. I've gotten the help that I need, both medically and just with the support and people around me and everything like that. And like depression is a really dark journey. It's very, very dark. And no one can properly explain it. You'd have to experience it to really understand what it's like. But it can take you down some really dark paths. I've said that a lot in this episode, but I've been down them myself. And like there were times where I didn't want to live anymore. Like I truly wanted to die and I would have preferred that over living. And I think that this podcast has given me life. And it's just something that I love to do. And I get to do it with somebody that I love in Ariana. And it's just it's amazing. It's all part of the journey. And to anyone listening who's going through something similar, like especially depression, because I know how dark it can be, just hang in there, please. And I promise you that things get better. And please reach out if you ever need anything.
Who's cutting onions in here? I'm gonna cry. Oh my god. Sorry. Oh my god. You can keep that in.
Okay.
Okay, we're gonna move on to the next question before I keep crying. That was a beautiful answer. Thanks for making me cry. I hope you guys cried too, so that I don't look like a fool. What are your future goals, Maya?
Future goals, I'd have to bring it back to this podcast. I really want to grow this podcast and I want it to be something that I can do and maybe, keep spreading awareness and normalizing a lot of these things that aren't really talked about too often. I think that, yeah, I've just found such a love for this podcast. And I know we haven't really posted consistently too much in the past little bit, but I'm finally in a place now where I think that we can make that happen a little bit more. And my future goal is to just keep posting consistently and finding people to have conversations with on this podcast.
I completely agree. I also think it's valid because we live very hectic lifestyles, okay?
We live very different lifestyles and very hectic lifestyles. So the fact that we can even
Yes.
find time to sit down together is a really big thing. And this is
Mhm.
no shade to Ariana or anybody. It's just like, I think we're both in a place now where we can finally start to find a little bit more consistency with podcasting and everything like that.
And even if we don't, also totally normal.
Then yeah, exactly. This is something we do because we love it and we don't want that to change.
What is a dream you hope to accomplish within the next 5 years?
Within the next 5 years, again, I would probably have to bring it back to this podcast. I think it would be really cool to have like a paid sponsorship on this podcast. I think that would be an
That'd be
ultimate
tight.
goal. That would be really tight. Or just like a I don't know, like just there we have a guest list that we would love to have. And I think there's some people on that guest list that we would love to have on this podcast. And I think that would be a realistic goal to set for the next 5 years.
I completely agree. I just love doing this with you. And I also love the conversations that we're having. And it's also interesting for me to see, like how everyone responds to the questions that we ask, because we ask people similar questions, but they're almost worded in a different way for everyone. And it's just interesting to see not only the like others journeys, but also how they respond to these questions, because like I mentioned before, everyone's unique and everyone's journey is completely different. So I hope that we keep having these conversations, and I hope that it doesn't end here. I hope that other people are having these conversations and we're just normalizing this kind of
Yep.
conversation, because when we started this podcast, it was because we felt that these conversations weren't being had
Yeah.
enough and we wanted to talk about them more. So I hope in the future, not even just in 5 years, but in general, this isn't the end of it. This is just the beginning of it in some kind of way.
No, exactly. And for me, sharing my story, I did it because there were so many other people that inspired me. And I think one of those people, not to be cheesy, is Victoria Garrick. And for those of you who don't know Victoria Garrick, she is a mental health and body image advocate who went through her own kind of mental health struggle and has recently, not recently, but she has shared her experiences, and just her whole concept of everything, I think, has just really inspired me, and so many other people like Brittany McLean as well, who we actually were lucky enough to have on the podcast, just sharing their journeys. Just, it's nice to know that you're not the only one, and it's just really inspiring to see that we can share in a safe space, and we wanted to create one of those safe spaces to share. So I guess we're coming to the end of this podcast. I think it's a good idea though, Aryanna, that we update the listeners on some hype songs.
Ooh. Oh wait, yeah.
Songs that we're just feeling.
Yeah, we haven't done that in a while. Okay.
No.
Who was mine? That's a great question. Okay, the first one that pops up in my mind is The Weeknd. It's by The Weeknd. It's on his new album. Yep. Second song of the album. You won't miss it. Also, if you're not listening to it in order, you're weird. It's a second song. It's called Gasoline. I don't know why, but I play it at least 3 times a day, maybe 5. That's like on the minimum, at least 10 times.
That's a good choice.
I really, thank you. I've been loving it a lot recently. How about you?
Mine is actually off of Dawn FM too, because I'm a big Weeknd fan. I think the whole album is a masterpiece in itself, so it's hard for me to choose one song. But if I had to choose one where the beat just really gets me, it would have to be Is There Someone Else?
Oh, I love that one. That one's so good too.
And if you listen to the transition from the song before into Is There Someone Else, it's even more immaculate. So
that's what I'm saying. If you're listening to this album, you better be listening to it in order, or else you're weird.
Yep.
Sorry, hate to say that.
You're doing it wrong if you're not.
Precisely.
Well, that brings us to the end of this podcast, listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in to me blabber on very nervously throughout this whole podcast. I don't know why I was so nervous for it. Thank you, Aryanna, for sitting down and talking with me and asking me all these questions, and for your constant support, because I truly couldn't do it without you.
Well, I love you very much, and I'm just honestly, I'm just honored to be part of your journey, and I love doing this with you. Thank you for having me. I love having this conversation with you, and I love asking you these questions. I just love hearing you talk. So I'm just glad to be here.
Anyways, listeners, thank you for tuning in to the 19th episode of the podcast, where we ask the questions that
nobody asks. See you later.
See ya. Bye.